Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take the sources you send us, find the core insights, and basically give you the inside track on what's important.
Yeah, getting you up to speed quickly.
Exactly. So today we're diving into a film critique one of you sent over for the 2010 action movie Unstoppable. It's pretty high-octane stuff.
Right.
And you mentioned wanting to get informed, quickly, but still get the full picture. So we're going beyond just a simple plot summary here.
Think of it like looking under the hood of the movie. We want to see what makes it run, what makes it effective as a film, the mechanics behind the thrill ride.
That's a great way to put it. Since our source is a full critique, we can really explore why Unstoppable works, or maybe doesn't always work, and maybe find some surprising things about how it was made and its impact.
Mm-hmm.
So the mission for this deep dive, understand what makes this film tick as an action thriller, and uncover some of that behind-the-scenes context.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first, the basic idea, the core premise.
And it's really simple but powerful. You've got this huge freight train, no one driving it, full of hazardous chemicals.
Right.
And it's just speeding towards a big city. That's your setup. It hooks you right away.
And what's really interesting, and the critique points this out, is that it's not completely made up. It's actually based on a real thing that happened.
Yeah, the CSX 88 incident back in 2001, they called it Crazy Eights.
Crazy Eights, right. That adds a whole different layer, doesn't it? Knowing something like this, maybe not exactly like this, but similar.
It could actually happen. It makes the threat feel much more real, more tangible than just, pure Hollywood invention.
The critique really talks about the film's pace, calls it breakneck, and how it mixes that crazy urgency with this very blue-collar kind of feel.
Yeah, and that combination, I think, is pretty key. You have this absolutely insane situation, but the people dealing with it are, they're regular working folks, not superheroes. So the action keeps you glued, but seeing these ordinary guys trying to solve this extraordinary problem, it makes the stakes feel really personal. It grounds the whole thing.
That makes sense. And that working class vibe comes through in the plot too, right? Mark Bomback's script. The critique says it focuses on simplicity, immediacy, and relentless forward motion.
It definitely does. It's almost like the script itself is trying to be like the train.
Right. No wasted moves.
Exactly. It doesn't really get bogged down in complicated subplots or deep character studies that aren't related to the main problem. Everything is about stopping that train.
It's a classic ticking clock, isn't it? The critique mentions how geography, time, and just basic physics become part of the action.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about the people. It's about how far the train has gone, how much time is left, the speed, the curves in the track.
All of that builds the tension.
Right. Every mile marker, every town it approaches, you feel that pressure increase. The train itself is like this unthinking antagonist.
Now, the critique does acknowledge that some of the setup, the distracted engineer at the start, the sort of fumbling by the authorities, feels maybe a little convenient.
Well, you could say that. They might not be the most subtle plot points.
Right.
But the critique kind of argues they work as narrative shorthand. They just need to get the crisis started fast, get the train rolling, establish the danger, and move on.
It's like, okay, we accept this bit of convenience to get to the main event.
Pretty much. It serves the purpose of launching the core conflict quickly.
The critique also flags some dialogue that's, pretty blunt. Like that line, we're talking about a missile the size of the Chrysler Building.
Yeah, that one stands out. It's definitely not subtle dialogue. But, in this kind of action movie, that heightened language, it kind of fits. It's there to instantly convey the sheer scale of the threat to the audience, even if it's maybe a bit over the top. It works for the genre.
And what about using the news reports so much to explain things? The critique says it stretches credibility sometimes, but it keeps the momentum going.
It's definitely a common technique, especially in disaster or action films.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off, right? You sacrifice a bit of realism, maybe, to keep the audience informed quickly and keep the story hurtling forward. It avoids slowing things down for, long explanation scenes.
Okay, let's shift gears then. Talk about the characters, the performances.
Yeah.
Denzel Washington as Frank Barnes, the veteran engineer. The critique praises his effortless gravitas.
Yeah, Denzel is he's so good at that. He takes what could be a kind of stock character, the experienced, slightly world-weary guy, and makes him feel completely real and compelling.
Stoic is the word they use.
That's perfect. He doesn't have to do much to convey that sense of competence and, quiet determination. You just believe him.
And then you've got Chris Pine as Will Coulson, the younger conductor. The critique mentions him shedding that Captain Kirk image for more of a blue-collar guy.
Right, and their dynamic is crucial. They start off kind of prickly, antagonistic almost,
Yeah.
but facing this crisis together, they develop this respect, this sort of fraternal bond. That relationship gives the audience an emotional anchor amidst all the, chaos and metal.
It's that classic pairing, finding common ground under pressure.
Exactly.
And Rosario Dawson, as Connie, the yard controller, she apparently brings a lot of steel and credibility to a role that could have just been exposition.
She really does. And it's important, like the critique notes, to have this strong, competent woman in a key position of authority in this kind of genre film. She's not just reacting. She's actively trying to manage the crisis. She brings that urgency.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the other characters? The critique calls the corporate guys almost cartoonish villains.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, they're not exactly layered characters.
But the critique links this to Tony Scott's style, calling it pulp adrenaline. What does that mean in this context?
Well, Tony Scott's films often operate in this heightened reality. The focus is on the thrill, the energy, the visceral experience, so the supporting characters often serve very clear functions. The villains are clearly villainous to create obstacles and raise the stakes quickly.
It fits the high-energy good versus bad mold.
Right. It's less about deep psychological profiles and more about driving the action forward in that specific pulp style.
Okay, speaking of Tony Scott,
Yeah.
his direction is flagged as maybe the key element here.
Yeah.
What makes his style so impactful and unstoppable?
Oh, it's pure Tony Scott. You've got the super fast editing, the really saturated colors, those signature zooms and whip pans.
The helicopter
It's
shots.
constant helicopter shots, yeah. It creates this incredible energy, this sense of relentless motion that just perfectly matches the runaway train. His style makes the train itself feel almost like a predator.
And a big point in the critique is the practical effects. They actually use real trains, did real stunts.
Which makes a huge difference, I think. You feel the weight, the danger of all that metal moving at speed. It gives it a kind of grit and realism that you sometimes lose with too much CGI. It feels tangible.
The critique praises the pacing, too, saying it keeps up that intensity but somehow doesn't get confusing, which seems like it would be easy to do with all that fast cutting.
It's a real skill. Scott was a master at controlling that chaos. He keeps throwing problems at the characters, keeps the tension high, but you always understand what's happening, where things are. It's very controlled mayhem.
Let's get into the specifics of that look and feel. Ben Sarason's cinematography, described as muscular, capturing big landscapes, but also tight, claustrophobic, trained interiors.
That contrast is really effective. You get the sense of this massive machine tearing through the countryside, the scale of the potential disaster, but then you're trapped right inside the cramped locomotive cab with Frank and Will, feeling their immediate pressure. And those colors, the sort of rusty autumnal tones, add to that whole gritty industrial feel.
And the editing, brisk and kinetic yet coherent, cutting between different places, different people to build tension.
Yeah, that cross-cutting is vital. You're seeing Frank and Will trying something on the train, then cutting to Connie in the control room reacting, then maybe to the people on the ground.
Right.
It layers the perspectives and just keeps tightening the screws, keeps you constantly aware of how the situation is escalating everywhere at once.
And sound design. The critique highlights the score by Harry Gregson Williams being effective, but maybe understated, while the actual sounds of the train are powerful.
Oh, the sound is huge in this film. The roar of the engine, the screeching metal, the clatter, it puts you right there. It's visceral. You feel the power and the danger through the sound.
Yeah.
And the score complements that. It adds to the tension and the emotion without, overpowering the raw sounds of the action itself.
So beyond just the surface level action, the critique suggests there are some themes bubbling underneath, like corporate irresponsibility versus working class integrity.
That's definitely there. You see the contrast pretty clearly between the executives worried about the stock price and the potential lawsuits.
Right, the bottom line.
And then Frank and Will, who are literally putting their lives on the line to save people, doing the right thing despite the risks, despite maybe company policy. It's a classic theme.
There's also that dynamic between Frank, the experienced veteran, and Will, the younger guy. Ideas about masculinity, maybe redemption for both of them?
For sure. Frank is facing forced retirement. Will has his own personal issues and mistakes in his past. Stopping this train becomes more than just a job. It's about proving something to themselves and others.
Finding purpose in the crisis.
Yeah, and the relationship evolves through that shared experience. It touches on how experience and maybe youthful energy can work together.
And briefly, the critique mentioned how the news coverage within the movie sort of reflects media sensationalism.
It's a subtle touch, but yeah, you see how the event quickly becomes this huge media spectacle, which is, pretty realistic in how these things are often covered.
So wrapping it all up, the critique basically says, look, it's got some flaws, logic holes here and there, maybe some over-the-top bits.
Sure, it's not perfect.
But ultimately, it's just a really well-made, taut, and exhilarating ride that knows exactly what it wants to be.
Exactly. It sets out to be a thrilling, practical action movie, and it absolutely delivers on that. The critique calls it a love letter to practical action cinema.
That sounds about right. Especially comparing it to maybe more CGI-heavy blockbusters.
Yeah, it feels different, more grounded, even in its craziness. The critique sums it up as loud, fast, rough around the edges, and undeniably thrilling.
A diesel-powered breath of fresh air. I like that.
It captures it well. It's a reminder that sometimes a simple, strong premise, great performances, and focused high-energy direction are all you really need for a great action film.
Okay, so bringing this deep dive on Unstoppable to a stop, hopefully not as dramatically, we've seen its simple premise, based on that real Crazy Eights incident, creates immediate tension. Then you have the strong leads, Denzel Washington, Chris Pine, Rosario Dawson, really anchoring it. And Tony Scott's direction, that kinetic style and the practical effects, just makes it incredibly visceral.
Right, and even with all that speed and noise, there are those underlying themes about responsibility, experience, corporate versus individual action.
So for you, our listener, wanting that quick but thorough understanding, hopefully this is giving you that richer perspective on Unstoppable, looking at the why and how behind the thrills.
Yeah, going beyond just watching it to appreciating the craft involved.
And here's something to maybe chew on.
Yeah.
Think about how those real-life events like CSX, 8888, the inspiration here, kind of echo in our world. How they make us think about safety, who's responsible when things go wrong, and how ordinary people sometimes show extraordinary courage.
It's interesting, right? Maybe look up the actual Crazy Eights story if you haven't. See how reality compares to the Hollywood version. It often highlights both the drama inherent in real life and the choices filmmakers make to heighten it.
Absolutely. It shows how these real incidents can become powerful stories about risk and heroism.
Definitely food for thought. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping right into the world of Unstoppable.
That runaway train thriller.
Yeah, exactly. And you might think, okay, action movie. But we dug up some, pretty fascinating behind-the-scenes stuff.
Stuff that might actually change how you see it.
Right. So our mission today, uncover those surprising facts, get a better handle on what makes this film, really work.
Yeah, forget just the explosions for a second. We're talking about the real event behind it. The director, Tony Scott, his final film, and just how much effort went into making it feel real.
Okay, let's start there with the whole inspired by true events thing,
Yep.
because it was. Sources point to this 2001 incident in Ohio, the Crazy Eights train.
That's the one. An unmanned train just going
For 66 miles.
wild. A real crisis.
Totally. But, okay, here's the big difference, and this is key. The movie has all the big dramatic heroics at the end.
The Denzel Washington moments.
Exactly. But the sources, they say the real train wasn't stopped like that at all. No Denzel-style stuff happened. Okay, so a different method was used in reality.
Yeah, entirely different. It sort of shows you how Hollywood takes that core idea and, ramps it up for drama.
Which makes sense. Audiences love a hero.
We do. We want that big payoff.
Now, something else about this film. Its place in film history is kind of significant.
You mean Tony Scott?
Yeah. This was the last movie he directed.
It really was. And knowing that, it adds a certain poignancy when you watch it now, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And people have definitely revisited it since he passed away.
For sure. It's seen now, I think, not just as a thriller, but as like pure Tony Scott. All that energy, his visual style.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Speaking of visuals, the realism. They really went for it.
Oh, yeah. Forget tons of green screen. Our sources say they used actual trains.
Real trains on real tracks. Where was this?
Ohio and Pennsylvania, mostly. They were often filming in, live railway environments.
Wow. That must have been intense.
Incredibly. Strict safety, everything tightly controlled. But using real locations, real machinery, it just gives it that gritty feel. you know?
You can definitely feel it when you watch. And it wasn't just the trains, right? Denzel Washington.
Ah, yeah, his commitment.
He insisted on doing a lot of his own stunts.
He did. The sources specifically mention him running on top of moving train cars.
Get out! Really?
Yep. Apparently, he really wanted to bring that authenticity, that urgency himself.
That definitely adds to the tension in those sequences. You believe it more.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the physical stuff that felt real.
What else?
The dialogue. Some of the back and forth between Washington and Chris Pine. Apparently, it was improvised.
Oh, interesting. Like they just riffed off each other.
Seems like it. And that kind of spontaneity, well, it helps their relationship on screen feel much more natural, more organic.
You can see how their characters sort of bond over the course of the crisis.
Exactly. Those unscripted moments can sometimes be the most genuine.
Okay, so let's quickly pull this together. Unstoppable. Starts with a real incident, the Crazy Eights train.
Right, but they changed the ending for dramatic effect. Hollywood style.
It's Tony Scott's final film, a real showcase of his style.
And they pushed for realism with actual trains, real locations.
And Denzel Washington doing his own dangerous stunts, plus some improv dialogue.
Yeah, pretty much sums it up. And what this deep dive shows, I think, for you listening,
Yeah.
is how all these things, the true story, the Hollywood spin, the director's vision, the actor's dedication, they all mix together.
It shapes how you experience the movie, right?
Yeah.
Blurs that line between what's real and what's made for the screen.
Totally.
So here's something to think about. Knowing all this now, the real story versus the movie, Tony Scott's legacy, how they filmed it, does that change how you feel the tension next time you watch Unstoppable?
Does it make the stakes feel different? Higher, lower, just different?
Yeah. Definitely something to chew on after our deep dive today.